We have six values. I won't go through them all, but one of my favorites is called "Own Your Shit," and so it's a Dan Harrisism for we all bring incredible baggage into every conversation, every action that we do, and that's human, that's normal. Acknowledging that, bringing it into the conversation, into the awareness, that's really the magic.
I don't know how you felt over the last 2 years, but I would say if you polled America, you'd see high rates of just anxiety and stress all over the place. I'll also be the first one to admit that when I was growing up, I always said the word mental to describe people. And sometimes I thought about my health, but I never said mental health together. Those two words never came together. And now kids, collegiates, college kids are talking about mental health. It's been democratized. And today we are joined by Ben Rubin. He's the co-founder and CEO of 10% Happier. Ben, thanks, man, for giving us a little bit of your time today.
Thank you. Yeah, excited to be here. Good to meet you.
I mean, are you seeing this? Is that how you're seeing it? It's like this topic that no one talked about now is like the topic du jour?
Yeah, and I'll actually connect mental health for a second to, I think, the larger predicament that we're in as a culture, and maybe we can move towards some solutions. But the entire modern project, I've heard stated as having three major problems: unsustainable, there's massive inequality, and it's creating this general sense of like unease in our minds and our relationships that is pervasive and is growing in its challenge. And I think that is a global issue that, has been exacerbated by the last 2 years, but was present and is continuing.
So 10% Happier, it starts as a book. I could tell you when I wrote Return on Courage, I wish I could have said I had like a master plan to build like a platform on courage. That wasn't the case. I will stay on record that no doubt I thought I was writing a pretty good business card for a point of view, but I never saw it as something that would lead to like keynotes and courageous leadership and courageous change and courageous reinvention. Now, 10% Happier, it's not just a book, it's a full platform. And I mean, who knew we were so deficient on being happy, by the way? And you've been there since the beginning. What changes have you seen from book to platform?
Sure. Yeah. So the 10% Happier, I think, similar to what you're describing, started as a book that became much more. And the book was written by my co-founder, Dan Harris, who is an ABC News anchor who, was type A, thought meditation, mindfulness were, bullshit, and learn differently. So he wrote a memoir that he was expecting no one would read. Many people read it, including me. And at that point, I was starting a company. I'm sort of an entrepreneur, throughout my entire career, that was looking to help people transform their behaviors and make meaningful change in their life. And so meeting Dan and then really eventually meeting all of the teachers that we work with led to this realization that, not only, could Dan open the door, but we could really bring people into an experience where they could learn not just the basics of meditation, but how it can really impact your life and why.
And how did you two cross over? What's the connection there?
So in starting this company that prior to being 10% Happier was called Change Collective, we had launched sort of 8 different books with kind of authors like you, where we took a topic, turned it into like content in a mobile app that someone could follow along with. And 10% Happier launched, and we, one of the folks at the company read it and was like, we got to do something with Dan Harris. And we found, we literally, I think, called a Boston Globe reporter that we knew that had written an article on him and said, can we get connected? And, a day later we're on the phone and he was interested in working together. So long story from there, but that's how it started.
Well, I'm curious, were you like, hey, we think this is more than a book? Or at the time you're like, choice A is we have this platform that can amplify your content? Or did you know out of the gate, you're like, I actually think there's something more here? Did that come later?
It's a little bit of both. So I'll mention kind of both sides of the story. On the business side, the original concept was struggling, right? We were, you know, making content that we really thought could be valuable, but we were not actually partnering with authors and finding big audiences for it. So, normal startup sort of early stage problems, but it wasn't working. So, looking for, some direction to move in was part of the impetus. But I think the more important part of it was that when I met Dan about a year earlier, I'd gone on my first silent meditation retreat and, had kind of the lid popped off my head and started to understand that there's a lot here that was going to be meaningful for me, that could be meaningful for many people. And so, when we started working with Dan, building some content, and particularly met Joseph Goldstein, who is sort of one of the lead guiding teachers on the app. I saw a depth there that I had not experienced elsewhere in life that really pulled me, and so that led to those factors combined.
I mean, you bring up like the question of all questions, which is why is it that it's like, oh wow, the minute that this works for us and it's super primal, that all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, if I need this and it's helping me, why isn't anyone else doing this at the level that I think they could do this? And if you had to, like, if we polled entrepreneurs, what percent would actually answer, well, it worked for me and therefore I did it, versus like, here's the opportunity. It's more unemotional, maybe not so real. But what percent do you think are, it helped me versus it's just a good idea, we're going for it?
So if I had to put a number on it, I'd say 90+%, it has to be real and emotional for you. And it's because starting a company is so massively hard, right? You know this. Anyone who's tried knows that you're gonna have every manner of trouble along the way, and if you're not deeply committed in a way that goes beyond the financial incentive or your ego, you're going to fail along the way. You're going to give up before you overcome obstacles. So that certainly was the case for me in all of my entrepreneurial activity. That unless I had that pull, it just wasn't worth going through that process of failure and challenge.
I still think that's a lesson for entrepreneurs. There's definitely been times in my career where, I'm chasing the money. And now I'm like, okay, like if there was an XY axis, then I think if you're listening, you could do this at home, by the way. It's like up one side, you could put love, and down the other side, you could put money.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the more you can find that sweet spot, like that's where you should put your time as an entrepreneur. If you don't love it, good luck. Like you said, there's going to be too many speed bumps. And sometimes you love stuff, but you can't make money on it. Okay. Maybe you got a problem as well. So, by the way, so you're based in the Northeast. I know you lived in Boston for a long time. You just made a move. You went to quieter pastures in Maine. Like, do you feel like all of Boston can use this platform?
Yeah, kind of coming back to that modern condition that we're in, not only could all of Boston use it, but all of modern society could use it, and really all of humanity. And that doesn't mean that we're going to provide it or that everyone will pick up a practice like this, but at the root of most religious, psychological, spiritual traditions for thousands of years is this core insight that human unhappiness is caused by resisting the experience of what is going on, and that there's a way out of that. And so that kind of core insight, I think, is useful for everyone in Boston and everyone in the human experience.
So I want to unpack that a little bit, if you don't mind. So, like,
sure.
What I don't know if I'm interpreting this right, but I'll just take it the way that I took it. And this is pretty raw human moment for me too. So my first baby was my dog. His true name was Herman Berman. I kid you not. He was actually named Herman, which is why we went to look at him, because when you're a Berman and he's called Herman, you go look at that dog.
Gotta make that happen.
Gotta make it happen. So my wife and I, who weren't married at the time, stopped everything and we fell in love with Herman. And Herman passed away this month. He was 13. Like, seriously, my baby before babies. And so what I heard from you is not to suppress the pain. Yeah. Like, I still love, like, I try to choose to be like, although I'm sad about my baby, I'm also like, oh my gosh, I got 13 years with Herman. This is amazing. Is anything of what I'm feeling in this answer?
Yeah, I mean, I am also, my first baby was my dog. Her name was Lyra. She died now 3 months ago. So, 3 years ago. So my
feels like 3 months sometimes.
Pain, it does. It's different than what you're experiencing. But, to relate it back, like going through that experience of having, this amazing creature that loved me so much and I loved so much, meditation gave me the tool to really as fully as I could, experience the sadness and see that there was a sweetness in there, that in addition to the pain, there was joy and, gratitude. And, I'm not the spiritual teacher. I'm very much on this path. I don't know where you are on thinking about this, but like I'm closer to you than I am to our teachers. But what I can do is build an organization that can help these teachers and other really incredible humans who've done that work reach far more people in really amazing ways. And so that's a privilege of mine.
Yeah, I was curious, like, because I know you run the business side, so I was like really curious to be like, how spiritual are you? Or are you like, well, we got someone who does that, I stay in my lane? So it's cool to hear that. Although maybe, I don't know, would you call yourself a meditation guru or one who's just leading a meditation business? What is that relationship?
Yeah, I'm certainly not a meditation teacher or guru. And what's I think occurred over the last sort of 6 or 7 years running this organization is that my personal life, my spiritual life, has become ever more integrated into the work that I do every day, and that we've started to build an organization that more fully is integrating everyone's full humanity and their personal spiritual and personal psychological journey into the work in a really interesting way. Not without its challenges, but that has been the direction that the organization and me as a human has gone.
I mean, I have to imagine there's some, from an intentionality standpoint. Like, can you share some of the culture sort of commandments or rules or whatever? I don't know if you could call them something,
Sure.
but what can you share some of those?
Yeah, absolutely. We have 6 values. I won't go through them all, but one of my favorites is called "Own Your Shit," and so it's a Dan Harrisism for we all bring incredible baggage into every conversation, every action that we do, and that's human, that's normal. Acknowledging that, bringing it into the conversation, into the awareness, that's really the magic, and that's what we encourage, and help create a culture that encourages that. So that one really stands out to me as something that we try and practice every day.
What I like about it is I mean, you're probably going to be like, well, duh, but like it is human, and so many times you have people that have this other persona called the work persona, and they put on their button downs. And it used to be like you'd go to work, and during that time, you change into this other person. And like, own your shit is like, no, like just be you, and it's okay to be you, and bring that person to work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're hinting at the scary story I was telling earlier about, the modern life that we have being unsustainable, unequal, the sense of unease. There are pockets that are starting to change. And, I think of this conversation, the work we're doing in 10% Happier as being part of that. And, bringing truly your whole self into your work environment and bringing those walls down in a way that integrates those activities skillfully is, I think, part of what the world is starting to do in really exciting ways.
Well, I think, first of all, I should have probably started with this, but congratulations are in order. You're a blink away from 10 years, which is pretty awesome. I guess at 20 years, will you make people 20% happier, or does happiness compound, I guess, is the question.
We launched a podcast project called 20% Happier maybe a year ago. And we had the promise within the organization that there would never, ever be a 30% happier. The joke works once and only once.
Oh, man. Okay. But in all seriousness, you've been behind the curtain now for a decade. So how serious is the happiness business?
I can't see myself not being involved in an organization that has a mission like this to help humans, have more happiness, have less suffering. And I think it's very possible that I'll be running this organization, for the next 10, 20, maybe the whole career of mine, because the work that we're doing is clearly meaningful and it has such a deep impact on me personally that it's fully integrated, right? I don't have my personal life and my spiritual life and my friendships and my work in separate little buckets. They're intermixed in ways that are helping all of those. So it makes me really excited to continue to do the work.
Do you feel like you can stay in the joy and stay in the happy when you're also focused on running the business? Or I guess I'm kind of back to the last question a little bit too. Like you already mentioned these sort of this trilogy of gaps that need to be looked at. Those are fairly unhappy realities. So how do you toggle back and forth between the two worlds?
Yeah. I mean, the suffering of running a business is very real, and running a happiness business does not opt me out of that suffering. Um, and so, yeah, I think as many entrepreneurs would tell you, I've had countless anxious moments, sleepless nights, rageful reactions to things that are out of my control. I think the difference, at least as I've experienced it, is that sort of in the name 10% happier is this concept of continuous small steps forward improvements, right? The process of meditation, mindfulness, personal growth doesn't come with cheat codes that change everything. It's numerous small steps that add up to something meaningful. And so over the years, what I've noticed is that I spend less time in those ruminating, negative thought loop spaces because I'm noticing them. It's not because they're not happening. It's because I'm picking them up a little more quickly, and then I'm more skillful about what I do next.
How hard is it to get someone to like surrender a customer, right? Like they think it's going to be all, like you said, get the whole thing on day one, but it is these little steps. And how hard is it to articulate that? So when you run into people, the joys of advertising, right? Like I always say, sorry, you don't get 100% of anyone's attention. They're thinking about what time they're picking up their child or what they're going to eat for dinner. They're hangry. And then your message comes across. So like, how do you short circuit that human?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the brilliance of Dan's original message of 10% happier, and who he is as a human, right? If you think you're busy and stressed and trying to get out in the world, like Dan is that times 10, given where he sits in the world and like how ambitious he is. And so lots of people can look to Dan and say, if he's telling me that like small incremental improvements are going to add up to something meaningful, and he's going to make a bunch of jokes and say the word fuck along the way, I'm in to try that. And so that's the entryway. From there, the challenge and the joy is to convince someone that more than 10% happier is possible. And in fact, this points in a direction which can be quite meaningful for you personally and those in your life.
Yeah, this is the belief piece, right? Like if you don't believe it's actually possible, it's certainly not going to be possible. So, go unpack the relationship a little more with Dan. Like, how does the relationship work? Like, what's the dynamic? Are you guys texters? Are you talkers? Are you slackers? That's not slackers. Are we on Slack? What's the relationship look like? And specifically, even like what lanes do you both play in?
Yeah, most people, of course, when they think 10% happier, think about Dan, wrote the book, is on the app, his talent, like is everywhere in our material. And that really is his role, right? He is creating content. He is talking to teachers. He is like getting curious about what this whole thing is all about and doing it in public in a really courageous way, right? The word courage, I think, really applies to the vulnerability he brings to that. And it is really dramatically different from my lane, which is building an organization that has the capacity to, both bring, his voice and these incredible teachers, and over time, many more voices, to millions of people in ways that are transformative in their lives. And so I'm sort of day to day doing a totally different thing than Dan. And our communication is sometimes very close when we're talking about something that like where the business and the creative intersect, and sometimes he's off writing a book, heads down 7 hours a day, and I'm off building a company and there's not much communication, so it varies by season.
Is he like, Ben, you got it. I'm going to go make content. Please don't bring me into that. Or I trust you with that. Is it more like that?
I think the relationship has morphed over time, and he and we have realized that like he is really happiest when he's able to talk with teachers, go deep personally, and tell stories and create content and bring that to life. Like that's where he gets his joy, and where he can have the most impact. And I'm pretty much the opposite in that I get my joy and have my impact by like building the system and, creating a company rather than being, the front man.
You had brought up this concept earlier about control. And when you can control things, usually it's like, all right, cool. But the last few years, we really haven't been able to control much. Pandemic happens, and next thing you know, we're all trying to figure out remote work. And, as the leader of the organization, you're kind of like, okay, like, how do we do this? How do we, and so I'm curious, like a lot of people now that we're through it have said we have a happier workforce because of remote work. Do you see that? And then 1-2 punch here. Great, we're happier, but are we as effective as we once were?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for us, I think what the pandemic accelerated was a pretty painful disconnection as we grew as an organization from, a group of people who, in the early days were like 4 or 5 people and then 15 or 20 people in a single room who really felt cohesive, felt the trust, to suddenly growing, doubling the company again and being remote in a pandemic at the same time. That led to trust gaps and relationship gaps that made it really hard for a significant period of time to like operate the business, be effective. And what we did with that, and there's plenty of suffering to bring us to this point, so it was not easy and is not done, is we recognized that like the way that we were working together needed to fundamentally change to move towards more collaboration, more trust, but in a really deeply pragmatic way. And so as we've been transforming the organization in that way, I largely credit the pandemic with sort of having forced our hand on that. And so that's how we've reacted. More globally, I'm happy to chat about that as well, but very different story.
Yeah, but I'd love to hear more on like even internally. Like, yeah, I fully agree that before the pandemic, we talk a lot about early adopters. Oh, the early adopter will lead the way and word of mouth, and that's how this thing spreads. But I felt like the pandemic, and I'm not calling you guys a late adopter, by the way, but it was sort of the late adopter. If they wanted to stay slightly connected, that had to figure stuff out. Like they had to figure out technology. Like my mom, love her. She's getting close to 80 here. If she wanted to stay connected, she had no choice but to figure out stuff that she had never played around with before, like Zoom, right? Or the Zoom, right? As she might say it.
Yeah.
So like for the company, I'm curious to hear more about what you mean by how did you create those collaboration opportunities, those trust loops, and close those gaps during the pandemic?
Yeah. The way that the traditional companies run is the people at the top have the power and set the goals and then distribute those goals in ways that folks who are across the organization then have some level of autonomy to go execute on. But it's, that's the structure of our world and the modern economy. What we're attempting to move towards, and it's a challenging thing, and I don't want to present it as anywhere near done, is an organization that intrinsically has more trust and has sort of sufficient feedback loops and trust loops flowing such that more people in the organization can make decisions that matter. More people in the organization can have autonomy around the work that they do, the impact that they have in a high trust environment. And so this is sort of my passion as an organizational leader, is trying to create the conditions that make that possible, but has a lot of components to it.
I'm not sure if you can share this, so you could call me off on this one if they were into proprietary arenas. I get it. But like, other than 20% happier or maybe 30% happier, like when you think about the horizon and where the company's going, what can you share about where you think you all will land?
Sure. Yeah. So the first thing I'd say is that as an organization that cares primarily about the mission of helping people see what leads to happiness and what doesn't, I am more than happy to share what we're doing. And, if it inspires others towards that same mission, that's amazing. It could inspire collaboration. Very excited about where we're headed. What I'd say is what gets me most excited outside internal transformation is that we're starting to take customers on a deeper journey, right? 10% Happier starts with the book. It's a beach read. It's fun. It gets you into the world. Dan on the podcast is, easy to listen, but with really deep content. You get into the app, you start to learn how to meditate. And, until very recently, that was where it ended. We've just introduced a coaching product where you can, both in a one-on-one setting and as part of a group, be in the same space as an incredible meditation teacher who can help you think about your meditation practice, think about your life, think about how you want to make change in your life. And so that's the type of transformative sort of experience that we're moving towards coaching. And then at some point we want to move into physical spaces and retreats because those are so meaningful for people in their process.
Yeah, look, I think after being pent up for 2 years too, like we are ready for experiences. Experiential is real. And look, I see you guys as anxiety insurance. Like, I don't know, I don't have access to your employee manual, but like, I would not be surprised to see like the democratization of stress relief in there. And like you said, you kind of touched on it earlier. That's not a, I made a joke about Boston. That was probably because I lived in New York. It's not a Boston thing. It's not a Northeast thing. It's a global thing. The concept of being the democratization of stress relief, there's no borders on this thing. How is that like? Does that bring you joy to have such a big quest to know the work is not done? This is actually for 7 billion people? Or like, is that how you look at it for the long game?
Yeah, I mean, the way that I see it is that as a society, we need to solve these key issues around sustainability, lack of equality, and this sense of like unease and anxiety. Like if we do not address those, do not pass go, I don't know what happens. It's bad. And so, I see us as being, one small part of a larger societal movement that is doing that. And what brings me excitement is that we potentially can have even more impact than we're having today. And we're having a ton of impact, right? The number of people that we're reaching at the depth that we're reaching them is truly meaningful. And I see sightlines to far more impact than that. So, how could that not excite me given where I come from and what I want to do?
I'm glad you kind of went there. So I would love to, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you, if you don't mind me
Sure.
going there. Like, so where'd you grow up?
Grew up in Reading, Mass, just north of Boston. So spent most of my life hating New York.
And this concludes our show. No,
we can trump up a feud.
Yeah, I would say so. Red Sox or a sports guy, not a sports guy.
I mean, was once in the day. Barely pay attention to it now.
Like, what was the path for you to entrepreneurship? Like, did you know when you were 6? Was it in your family?
It was my family. Yeah, my parents were both small business owners. My mother, an audiologist. My dad helped her run, 2 offices and a practice. So, I saw both the freedom that offered them and like the incredible amount of tension it created in their lives and their relationship, and somehow decided to do that myself. So, I think the thing that I most appreciate about experiencing that growing up is that I had permission to do it, right? It didn't seem weird or strange to anyone. And I also had permission to fail, right? It was known that was, not only a possibility, but a likelihood. So I ended up starting my first company in the last 2 years of college. It's a company that called Zio, which helped folks measure and manage their sleep quality, and did that for 7 or 8 years and crashed it into the ground at, near full speed on the other side of it. And then got up and, started this.
Yeah, but you were way ahead on that. Like, that's like a known idea now. I don't want to bring up any pain points, and I don't want you to lose any sleep over that, but like, I think we're doing just fine at this point. Any siblings?
2 younger sisters. Yeah.
So you're leading the charge here. And what do you mind sharing what they're up to?
Sure. Yeah. My middle sister also lives in the Boston area, has 2 young kids, and my youngest is a veterinarian, lives in the Virginia area. And it's interesting that, coming together with family these days has a different quality to it because I'm interested in more depth. I can sense they're interested in more depth, but it's hard to connect those dots given all of the lifetime of pattern that sits underneath it. So love both of them and, want to get deeper, but it's hard.
All right, we'll send them this. This will be the cue. It's funny. I always said that, again, it's going to sound like a shameless promotion, but like when there's a hard conversation that has to happen at a company, I'm always like, look, give them a copy of my book. Like, and no, first of all, one, who doesn't like to be gifted knowledge? And then two, okay, what's this really all about? What conversation, hard conversation do we have to have? So I truly do like the idea of like, sometimes it does take something like this that becomes the first inning, the portal to opening up those conversations. The reason I was really curious at your story and background, like I had a very lucky childhood. I had an older brother who's 5 years older, went to Georgetown Law. Do we pick our jobs? Do our jobs pick us? Well, I'm an observationalist for a living. I would just watch oh, my brother said that and he got in trouble. Don't do that. Don't go out that door if you're going to break out of the house in high school. Parents still together. I kind of feel like I had a cheat code, came out on level 5, that so many people didn't have. And I do relate that back to happiness, right? Like, I don't have a lot of that baggage. I own my shit. I had my own stuff, no doubt. But I know that I was very lucky compared to most. This is a show about courage. I feel like I'd love if you were in the room with yourself and it was today, Ben, talking to 21-year-old Ben. What's that conversation like? Who leads it? Who's saying what?
When I was 21, I also feel very privileged, and all the baggage that any human growing up in a modern society brings is there. But I was really tight, and the process of meditation, personal growth has just slowly loosened me up. Much more to go. So I might point in that direction. Which at that time, when I was 21, I don't know whether I would have listened to myself, but that directionality around, loosening, softening felt very antithetical to where I felt I needed to be, and yet is the direction that leads to happiness, fulfillment, at least for me.
All right, here's the opposite. So Ben today meets Ben 30 years from now. What do you hope 30 years from now Ben tells Ben today?
The same lesson. Loosen, soften, be more open, keep going. Every step that I take in that direction is confirmatory that's meaningful, beneficial to me, to others. So, who knows? Maybe in 30 years from now, Ben may learn something different that he brings back, but that's my guess.
So again, I always say there is no courage without fear. Fear and courage are kin. You got to go through one to get to the other. And sadly, a lot of people, they suppress their fears versus bubbling them up to the surface and addressing them. So if you could share one personal fear that you have today, permission granted to go as vulnerable or not as you want, and then one professional fear that does keep you up sometimes, can you give me one for each?
Sure. I'll start with the professional fear. The fear is that I'm not that good, actually, at what I do. Not terrible. The data would suggest I'm not that terrible, but how much of what brought me to today is luck? How much of it is repeatable? Don't know. So there's a pretty deep-seated fear that actually not that good a CEO, not that good a founder. It's pretty deep.
That's deep, and it so resonates with me. Like, for me, I've always been like, I'm not that good. I'm just going to outwork you. Like, since I'm not that smart or that good, I must have no choice but outwork you. Definitely resonates with me.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful that you went there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had that for a long time, the outworking. And at some point, it almost destroyed me. And I had to do something else. And it took me, a couple of years of not knowing, if I can't outwork everyone else, because that's destroying me, what else can I do? But my encouragement would be to, open to the possibility that level of intensity, that there may be a courageous opening there to soften.
These little stories that we tell ourselves are loops. I don't know if you call them loops or not, but that's the joke for me. I'd be curious if Dan felt this way or not. Like I said, going back to the top of the show, I thought I was writing a pretty darn good business card. And you go on this journey and you meet all these sage people, some astronauts, some founders, some people that study our brains. And every single person I met, it was almost like if the universe even decided the order that I was supposed to meet them, sort of reminded me like, oh, wow, I thought I was writing this book, right, for business, but I wrote the book because I needed the book. Like, I'm the one that needs this book first before anything else. And so, again, this is where I wish we had video, because there's a lot of head nods going on my side, specifically on like, yeah, that it totally lands and resonates. What about on the personal side, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
I'm not letting you wiggle out of that one, Ben.
Yeah. I think what's most resonant with me right now is a fear that I'm not playful and fun and sexy enough. That's, very early in my life, I kind of got the message that I wasn't enough of those things, and that I had to outwork everyone and put my head down and, go, 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 go. And, that still feels scary to me. And there's still tightness when I'm confronted with the opportunity to open up, be more playful. Sometimes it's a go, and sometimes there's still contraction and fear.
I'm not sure if you're going to let me go here, but where do you think it came from?
I think in my early life, my parents didn't talk to me about any form of sexuality, any form of like challenge I started to go through in sixth, seventh grade, like we all do, of like being in like intense social situations, either, romantically or not, and just feeling inept and not cool and not okay. I didn't have support from them, or the support that I would have wanted, for myself at that point. And so I think I walled it off and said, if I can't win there, I got to win here. And win here was academics and business and, success. And it took me a decade to like start revisiting that and working through it, and still there, still deep seated, working on it.
When you feel that, is there stuff? I mean, we're kind of back to the same conversation about like, wow, this is helping me. I think there could be something here to help a lot of people. Are there components of 10% happier that play in that arena as well?
I mean, what you said 2 minutes ago, that, you thought you were writing a book that was a calling card maybe for other people, and it turned out to be the book that was for you. I feel the same way about the company I'm building. That fundamentally, of course, reaching lots of people, aiming to reach more, and I'm building the company that's helping me move along this path of healing, including some of these, deep-seated areas. And so I think the tools that I'm picking up through meditation, through mindfulness, through, navigating uncomfortable scenarios in more open ways, it's translating directly to like that set of deep-seated fears that are more sort of social, sexual, and in ways that, I think are still playing out.
What a ride, man. This life is something else. And again, this is another reason I wish we had video. I don't know if you could see this. I'm going to turn the camera down. So
mistake it, you'll make it.
Mistake it till you make it.
Mistake it till you make it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm a big component of this idea. Like, I'm not a fan of fake it till you make it. I get why it happens. I'm a mistake it till you make it guy. And it goes back to that own your shit and the messiness that comes of it. And, your story really resonates with me. I'm so appreciative of you opening up and sharing, and I try to reciprocate that. I do think we're all mirrors. And, if you were going to sort of wrap up our conversation and you wanted the viewers to walk away with like a 1, 2, 3 punch, you could do a 1. But if you was there, like, what do you hope sticks? What do you hope lands with them?
I think we're all doing a lot. At least people who are listening to this podcast are likely doing a lot in the world to try to make things better, right? Through their business, through, their profession, through, whatever they're doing in the world. I think my encouragement would be that although it can feel selfish or hard or some combination to look at your own unease and anxiety and where that, and fear, and where that's showing up and still showing up for you. That, far from being something that's self-centered, is actually, it's part of what your work, your relationships to the world needs from you. And back to the 10% happier, sort of mantra, it's It's a lot of small things added up over time. It's no one big thing. And, get curious about like where you can find a bit more ease, a bit more understanding.
That's great. Yeah. The other thing that really resonated with me was often you've got these audacious ideas, but it's the little steps that grow the habits, that build the muscles, right? That put you in a position to enjoy the journey, to then, oh, by the way, you didn't even realize that it's been 10 years that you've been doing this.
Yeah.
Right. And like, wow, how many people are you helping? And you're still trying to help yourself as you go along, and you recognize that. So that was my takeaway, Ben. Ben Rubin, thank you so much for joining, man. It's an absolute pleasure to get to know you a little bit, and let's stay in touch.
Yeah, same. It's really lovely to get to know you, and wonderful conversation.
Thanks, Ben.